Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe. I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Our guest today is Eric Rice, who is the co-director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence for Society at the University of Southern California. Eric, welcome to the show.
Today is Eric Rice.
Hello, Eric. You've got a video player turned on your computer. I need to ask you to turn that off.
I have a video player turned on at the University of Southern
California. I pulled up the article somewhere.
I think I just corrected that.
Okay, great.
In the background, my apologies.
I appreciate your enthusiasm for watching the interview. I'll encourage you to do that afterward.
I love the fact that I'm a co-director in the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Society, and the very first thing that I had was a technical flub using the internet. So this is probably par for the course for me since I'm a bit of a Luddite.
Well, you know, what I love about this story, in part, is that that is true to some extent. You may or may not be a Luddite at all, but the fact is, I think you are not a computer scientist.
No, I'm not. I'm a social work scientist. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm a professor in the School of Social Work, and I partner with computer scientists who are much better at these things than I am.
And I think that's why I see this being a sign of the maturation of artificial intelligence as a tool for social entrepreneurs. Because social entrepreneurs, many of whom will not be computer scientists, are now in a position to find one, and partner, and begin using these kinds of technologies for social good. Let's start by having you tell us about the program with the youth experiencing homelessness there in Los Angeles County.
Sure. Well, there's an enormous number of homeless youth in Los Angeles County. On any given night, you've got about 6,000 of them, and they're at really high risk for HIV. HIV prevalence is about 10%. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can help these young people. And one of the ways that we want to do that is to be working with their social networks. And in order to do that, we need to understand these social networks and model these social networks so that we can leverage them. And we're really interested in training these young people to become peer leaders within their communities to promote HIV testing and HIV prevention. And there's a great complexity to their networks. And so that therein enters artificial intelligence, because it allows us to model all of the complexity and uncertainty that happens in these networks and still give us some strategic decisions about who to engage with to help them engage their communities effectively. And so far, this program has been really successful. We did some pilot studies over the last year, and in the initial work that we did when we compared the AI version of this intervention to the standard social work version of this intervention, we got much better results with the AI version. We've got a couple of papers that we've started to put out about this work. And just to give you a taste of this, you know, when we did the AI version, about 70% of the network got reached with the messages, whereas when we didn't do the AI intervention, it was only about 25% of the network got reached by these messages. And then moreover, when we actually looked at how many of the youth who had gotten those messages who needed to get an HIV test started getting tested, it was about 40% within the AI version, and within the standard version, none of them converted after a month of us doing work in the field, which isn't to say that they won't convert maybe another couple months down the road. We've got more data to look at, but at least so far, it was a marked difference between these two groups when we use the AI, and it's really exciting to us about the potential to do this kind of work.
Now, tell me a little bit about the processes and how they're different. So in the manual, in the traditional social work process, how did the peer workers get chosen, and how is the AI process working?
Sure. So the traditional social work process is you pick the people who you think are the most popular. So you look at the people at an agency, you try to observe how they're interacting with each other, and you pick people that seem to be social butterflies, essentially. And you can even quantify that by asking people about how they're connected to their friends, and then actually counting the number of connections they have and saying, okay, we'll pick the people that have the maximum number of connections to other people. It's pretty simple. But when we use the AI algorithm, once we mapped out these networks, we partitioned the networks into these different sub-communities and then ran these artificial intelligence models that do predictive modeling of influence to try to see which people within those sub-communities would have the greatest pull within their communities. And it turned out to be a much more complex look at the networks and a much more effective way of doing things. In part, I kind of joke about that we talked about it being the Breakfast Club versus the high school football team. You know, you've got that movie from the 80s, The Breakfast Club, where you have these kids from these different cliques that come together for Saturday detention. They let down their guard, they become friends for the day, and then they go back to their social worlds at the end of the day, which is what we got when we used the AI algorithm. Whereas when we did the standard, social work version of doing this, what we really got was more like the high school football team. It was young people that were very popular and well liked, but they mostly were friends with one another, and they mostly had sort of limited sphere of influence outside of themselves and a few hangers on. And so it was really the algorithmic thinking that got us to really be able to penetrate this network effectively.
How is the data about each candidate peer worker gathered and entered into the system in order to use the system?
That's actually some old-fashioned boots on the ground social work. I mean, when we enroll the young people into the program, we ask them who their friends are, and then we generate these network maps that essentially are things that we do by hand to look at this. Initially, we were thinking about deploying a Facebook application where we would download their Facebook connections, but it turned out that the young people didn't have a lot of although almost all of them had Facebook pages, very few of them were using their Facebook networks to talk to each other. It was almost all used to talk to their friends from home and family members that weren't abusive to them still.
Yeah, interesting. Well, this is really fascinating. Now, as you've done that, it's been very successful. It's ongoing now. You've got great partners on that program. What other things are you looking at that have a similar potential for application?
Sure. Well, within the center, we have a few different things that we're working on right now. So Milan Tombe, who's my co-director, he's been really interested in wildlife conservation. And so he's working a lot with some parks in Uganda to work on how to do predictive modeling about where poachers might show up so that you can actually get snares that would kill elephants before they're ever deployed. We're also really interested in suicide prevention with people who are active duty members of the military. So a lot of times when people come back from deployments, they're at a much elevated risk for suicide, and we're thinking about trying to use artificial intelligence models to try to understand who might be at the highest risk and to do early intervention with those service members before they get to the point where they're suicidal. And we're also interested in, again, some other homeless youth work, which would be really working on substance abuse prevention issues. So expanding the complexity of the problem beyond HIV testing to be something that's a little bit harder to get traction on, which is, some of these young people have some substance use issues and substance abuse problems, and can we do some prevention work around those even thornier issues?
Yeah, those are certainly big issues and quite disparate when you start thinking about the range of potential applications. You mentioned in our earlier discussion that you didn't think mental health was an area of social work that AI would have much role. Help us understand a little bit about why that's a limitation.
Well, I guess in some sense, I agree with that statement, and I disagree with the statement as I was thinking about it more, which is that we're certainly involved in trying to do some suicide prevention work, which is certainly mental health work. I think more my thought was that if one is thinking about specific new clinical therapies or new drug interventions, this may or may not necessarily be a good space for AI, which tends to be better at looking at large populations, complicated networks, big quantities of data, predictive modeling, and knowing exactly how drugs work may or may not fit that state, although certainly there's some interest recently among people that are geneticists to think about using artificial intelligence in that sphere, although I don't have any colleagues that are doing that right now, but it certainly would be exciting work to get involved in if there were interest in such a thing.
My sense is that this is very early days in the use of AI in addressing social problems, based on our conversation. how do you see this field developing over the next 3 or 4 decades as you think about your students who
Sure.
have 30, 40 years ahead of them in their careers? How do you think this space will evolve?
Well, it's interesting to be an outsider to AI and be asked to comment on this, because I've only been working with computer scientists that do AI for about the last 3, 4 years. So I'm still new to this space myself. And I think that that's actually part of what's happening, right? Is that they, within artificial intelligence, whereas they used to focus on, can we build a computer program that can beat beat Kasparov in chess or something like this, better poker bots, better, Go players. They've now developed a whole series of techniques that can be applied to all kinds of large data structures that have very sophisticated strategy sorts of problems that suddenly open up possibilities to work on real complicated social and political problems. And there's an interest within the AI community to break out of that older mold. And, in some sense, Milland, my friend and colleague who's the co-director, he's very much on the vanguard of people within the artificial intelligence community that want to do something in the social world and make an impact in the social world. And part of what we're trying to do with this center is to simply say, look, artificial intelligence has an amazing set of methods and techniques that have been developed, and let's use those things to improve society in ways that we can use those tools right now. And I think that most people don't think of artificial intelligence in this frame. They think more about driverless cars or fears of killer robots and other sort of doomsday science fiction ideas, instead of thinking about, well, what can we do right now today with the technologies that are available, and can we leverage them in ways that might get us some traction on thorny social problems that have been things which social scientists have been invested in for a long time, and especially with partnering with people in social work and in other social sciences, really getting a complex understanding of human behavior and the dynamics of different populations. So for example, homeless youth have a complex social world that is unlike most of the rest of the social worlds in which most of us live in. But if you have social scientists that understand those worlds because they've been invested in them like I have for the last 15 years, you can then partner with these artificial intelligence modeling folks like Milland and really come up with some neat, interesting, provocative new solutions. And it's new problems for AI, it's new problems for social work, and it's a really wonderful marriage of a transdisciplinary action where something brand new and innovative emerges that neither one of us thought that we would be working on 4 years ago when we met.
So if someone wanted to partner with you today, what kind of research, what kind of application might you engage in with them? How would someone partner with you if they were interested? If they are watching this and they say, holy cow, I've got to talk to Eric about a partnership. What would it be like?
Sure. I think, we're trying to define a set of problems that we think are relevant. So the way we're thinking about this is within social work, there's a series of grand challenges that have been issued in the last year, really. It's an initiative that's been going on for a couple of years to develop these grand challenges, but there are things like ending homelessness, positive, healthy development for all adolescents, the human impact on global climate change. And we're also interested in issues that impact emerging markets and what people used to call the developing world. So we're also interested in things like wildlife conservation in Uganda, but we're also interested in poverty, issues of poverty that are impacting parts of the world that are in these emerging market spaces. And so I think that how they would get involved with us would probably be email me, email Milland, let us know what sorts of problems you're working on, what kinds of interventions you are trying in your space, what kinds of data you have access to, what sorts of problems you want to work on. And if it fits within this set of problems that we really think are social problems that are plaguing humanity, but which we know that if we could solve them would be, or even put a dent in them, would make the lives of people so much better that we would embrace the opportunity to find more collaborators, both within engineering, social science, people that work in non-governmental organizations, people that work in governmental organizations. I mean, we're very open to collaborators who want to try to do something new to make the world a better place.
What is if I'm a social entrepreneur who lacks the technology skills and I'm looking for a technologist, these are the people you're working with every day. What do their resumes say? How do I identify what if I'm looking on LinkedIn or looking at a resume?
Well, I guess you would be looking for, I guess the sorts of keywords like, artificial intelligence, influence maximization, machine learning, natural language processing. These are, I think, some of the common words that get used to describe these emerging techniques that were within artificial intelligence that would be relevant. And I think the other thing to do is to simply look to computer science departments around the world, and maybe perhaps even industry that is involved in artificial intelligence work as well. So that's going to be big tech companies like Google and Microsoft that have people that work very deeply on issues that are artificial intelligence. I think it can be a challenge if you're searching blind. So I guess those words like natural language processing and influence maximization and machine learning, those are good places to start to look for those technologists.
Great. Now, you are clearly a role model to your students and the community you're working with there. Who do you look up to as a role model?
Who do I look up to? I think my role models often come from the young people that I work with on the streets. And if I had to pick one in particular, in the last few years, I've been working with this one young person who was one of our peer leaders in one of our very early studies. And his name was Daniel. And he was this young man who was HIV positive. And I think the thing that really stood out to me more than anything else about him was that when he wanted to do this peer leader work around HIV prevention in his community, it was very, very important to him that he was open and out about being HIV positive. And I remember having this very long conversation with him about, are you sure that this is what you want to do? I mean, people are already discriminating against you because you're homeless, and now you finally that accept you, and now you're going to throw into this mix HIV status that people are afraid of, and to him, that was the point. It was that if he, as he said to me, if I can help even one other person not have this horrible disease, not have to live with the struggles of how am I going to get my medications when I don't have a stable place to live? How am I going to get through the day if I have side effects today and I feel sick when I don't have an easy place to go and find a bathroom, that it'll be worth it to have shared this. I'll take that risk. And that to me is actually not it is an exemplar story of homeless youth, but it's not, in a sense, a special story. He was a special young man, but that kind of generosity towards others is something that I see in these young people all the time, and it fills me with a sense of humility and admiration as I think about, I could not figure out how to navigate my way through the world if I didn't have a warm place to go home to at the end of the night, and yet these young people that I work with every day do, and it's an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, you could have gone into any field you wanted when you started your career. Why did you choose social work?
I actually chose it because of two very, very, I guess, simple reasons. One was that I wanted to make a difference in the world, and social work is within the universe of social sciences, which is what I was really interested in intellectually. It's the space in which interventions and being a force for change in the world is the thrust of the discipline. And to me, being able to try to make a difference in the world was so important. And also part of it was simply early on, about 15 years ago, when I started working with these homeless youth and some of the research projects that I was getting involved in, I realized that there was something about these young people and their sense of optimism and the kindness with which they treated each other and people like me. And despite the fact that they have every right to be acting like it's a dog-eat-dog world because they've been thrown away by society and their families they've been thrown away by, and they're running away from violence and abuse. And yet they have this humanity. And I was just drawn to this and thought, there was no choice. I had to work with these young people and try to help give them a voice and try to help give them opportunities. I couldn't not. It was,
well,
I couldn't do anything else, I think is the point.
It really is an inspiring response. But as you were talking, I couldn't help but wonder why these kids have been thrown away, to use your word. I think, what are the circumstances that lead them to be homeless?
Well, I mean, two of the biggest sources of this are simply growing up in impoverished families where there's a lot of substance abuse and a lot of domestic violence and a lot of violence that's perpetrated against these kids. And so some of them will be thrown out from these violent situations, and some of them make the really difficult decision to run away instead of continuing to be abused. And the other really tragic one is that there's a lot of these young people who are LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender kids, who experience a very similar dynamic wherein they are either thrown away by families who don't accept them for this, or they feel so rejected by the communities that they live in that they feel that being on the streets is better than being, constantly bombarded with this discrimination and harassment. And so you have a lot of young people on the streets who I think are perceived sometimes as just wanting to be out there, and they don't want to get a job, or they don't want to deal with parental supervision or something like this. And the reality is that almost all of them have been through a horrendous amount of violence. I mean, it's like 80% of them have been either sexually or physically abused. And so they're really just trying to make their way through a world that has treated them terribly, and they're looking for opportunities to shine and pull themselves out of this situation. It's just really hard, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where the rental vacancy rate is below 3% and the cost of living is extraordinarily high, and very difficult if you dropped out of high school because you've been abused and you ran away to get through that kind of economic environment and get back on your feet. And yet they struggle to do it all the time, and it's an inspiring thing to watch, and it's an admirable thing to watch, frankly.
Yeah, well, that is inspiring. Well, last question, Eric.
Okay.
What is your superpower?
My superpower, I guess I have two. One is that I actually care, and the other one is a little bit funnier, which is that I can probably teach multivariate statistics to anyone if you give me about 40 hours of class time with them. Even the most reluctant math-phobic social worker I can teach to be a modeling whiz after a semester. But I think probably the fact that I care is more important.
Those are great superpowers, Eric. Great superpowers. Now, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about the program?
Sure. I think three easy ways. One is my email address, so you can Google search me, Eric Rice USC, and you can find my email address on the web. The other is my Twitter, which is @EricRicePhD. And the last is the website for the center, which is CAISS.usc.edu. And there we've begun to post up some of the initial work that we're involved in over the last couple of years.
Fantastic. Well, Eric, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I wish you every success in your work with the youth there in Los Angeles, as well as your broader attempts to use AI to solve social issues.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Let's do some good.